You're listening to the best, the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite. The bravest. I love that theme. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 236 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. It is indeed the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, volume 34. We'll get to my guest in a second. Just want to say real quick, if you have not checked out the previous episode, 235, that was on Friday with Mark Mulitz, retired NYPD police officer. I accidentally gave him, when we joked about it, a battlefield promotion. I said he was a sergeant, got his rank mixed up, but that's okay. He was a police officer. Started out in the housing police, did 5 years there. Then in 90, made the switch to the city PD, where he finished out his career. Great experiences, worked in Midtown, got the chance to see the Rangers up close and personal on the security side, and he got to see them for free, mind you, especially in 1994, which I'm jealous of him for. But it was good to talk to him. It'll be good to talk to my next guest, who has a history with hazardous materials, and that's putting it lightly. He was a charter member of the FDNY's HazMat team, which was formally established in 1984. 35, almost 36-year veteran of the FDNY. He originally came on in 1982, staying on towards the end of 2017, where he retired with the rank of battalion chief. An instructor, he's trained other members of the fire service on, you guessed it, HazMat, and that for this volume 34 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, retired FDNY battalion chief, Bob Ingram. Bob, thanks for doing this. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Mike. It's nice to be here.
Nice to have you, and forgive me for butchering the English language. So with that being said, before we get into your career, of course, where'd you grow up?
Grew up on Long Island, actually born in New Jersey, Bradley Beach. While my father was in the Korean War, my mother raised me over there with her parents, and we moved to Queens when my father left naval service and started working for Sperry Gyroscope, one of the defense companies on Long Island, and we moved out to Comac. 1957. I'm still living in Comac.
Okay, so born and raised and throughout your career. It's good. Hey, listen, nothing wrong with staying where you originally were brought up. If not, well, you were born in New Jersey, like you were saying, but you moved out to Comac and pretty much stayed there since what? I imagine the age of 5, 6, maybe a little bit older than that. Two. Okay, so there you go. Almost born and raised, right? With the exception of the actual birthplace. So there you go. Were there guys out on the island that were volleys maybe out there, but were on the job in the city? Or how did you come to love the fire service?
It was through the volunteers.
Okay.
I went to college for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, the college, the Naval ROTC, and I all came to an agreement that I wasn't ready to finish school. So I came back home, and I started working locally. And some of my friends who had not gone away to college were volunteers in the Comac Fire Department. And after about 5 or 6 months being home in 1974, they talked me into joining. I joined in November of 1974.
So working out on Comac, it's an interesting territory out there. Just for the audience that may not be familiar with the area, how big is Comac and what kind of jobs are you guys going to out there normally?
If I have the numbers still correct, it's probably about 11 square miles and somewhere between 35,000 people and maybe 40. So it's a good suburban community. More and more workers that are out here, but many still travel into Manhattan. So it's a bedroom community of the city. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes into the Suffolk County line from Nassau County.
Oh, okay, so it's not that bad of a commute by train. By car, a bit of a different story, I imagine. But by train, not too bad.
The car can be anywhere from an hour to 4 hours, depending on weather and traffic.
Yeah, I don't envy those that have to deal with that kind of commute. So the train is the way to go. We're talking with retired FDNY Battalion Chief Bob Ingram. This is volume 34, the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. So from Comac to, not comic, I don't know why I was saying comic. I guess I got nervous. Comac, rather.
Well, actually, there are some people that say it is pronounced Comac from the Indian tribe way back when.
Ah, okay.
And if you only put one N in it, that M, that's what it sounds like, but it's spelled COMM.
Right. So that makes sense, of course. So the extra M kind of makes the difference in that regard. But working out there, of course, you develop some experience, and then the city test comes around. So tell me about, I guess, taking the city test and wanting to get onto the FDNY. It's not an easy journey, I should say, because so many take that test, and the wait time is also very lengthy.
If I remember, we took the test in 1978, and I only took it because some of my friends in the volunteer fire department in Comac talked me into it. They went on later on to become, Danny Brandenburger worked his career in Ladder 120 in Brownsville. Eddie Monahan was in Engine 217 and Rescue 4. Larry Schneckenberger was in Ladder 120. They convinced me to take the test. And I had in 1978, and I think there were like 80,000 people that took the test. It was like some incredible number. And I did score well on the test, but I actually turned it down for a couple of years. I didn't take it until I was almost 27, about 3.5 years into the job. I had a position in a company with a company car, and I was managing 6 stores in the city area, and it was a pay cut to go into the fire department. But the company sold, and I had already invested with my wife as a silent partner in a delicatessen and a butcher shop out here on the island. And I just purchased a house. So I was offered to move to California or Texas with the company. I opted to stay, and I ended up working in the butcher shop for a couple of years in the delicatessen with my partner. And we were putting everything back into the business. So it really wasn't conducive to family life. My wife was working nights. I was working days. So I called up the fire department, and the list was still active. They said, come on in. I went through the medical, and I was in the next class.
Wow.
I got into the class in January of 1982, January 9th.
Well, even though there was a rough chapter there, rough going for a little while, it proved to be the right decision to stay.
Oh, it was not something that I grew up thinking about, but I don't look back one day. That was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. It was, I'm thankful to those friends that talked me into it. I actually talked 2 of my brothers into the fire department. Also, one of them just retired as a senior firefighter in the safety battalion after 30 years. And my other brother is still on with about 34 right now.
Oh, good for them. All right. So it runs in the family, and you started it.
I actually have a son that's in 16 years. He's in the HazMat company.
Wow, there you go. Even more so. I wonder how he got there. No, he got there on a, obviously, listen, the last name does help, but you got to get there on your own merit. I'm kid, of course, and I imagine his merit made him more than worthy to be there. So good on him.
Yeah, no, he was good. He worked 9 years in Ladder 138, Corona Tigers, before going over there. So
listen, paid his dues, doing his thing. Good for him. Listen, I love. I like I said, I know I cracked that joke, but the legacy stories are great in both PD and FD, because now look at Chief Cansey's son. He's a chief now. I think he's a battalion chief. It's amazing. I love it. So yeah, it's good to see the family tradition staying strong in the FDNY. You don't see that kind of to a degree in the NYPD, but more so the FDNY. Not only is it the grandfather was on, the great grandfather was on, now the grandson's on.
I'll tell you a little story. As you know, I teach for the International Association of Firefighters as a contract instructor in hazardous materials. Mm-hmm. We go back and we do the HazMat operations classes for the recruits in the FDNY. I was doing a class there last June. And the squad comes in the morning, first day, and the squad leader, recruit firefighter, probationary firefighter, so-and-so Hopkins, all present and accounted for. And I said, Hopkins, is your father a battalion chief in the 5-0? And he said, yes, sir. And I said, I worked with him. I said, is your grandfather John Hopkins, and he worked in HazMat 1? He said, yes, sir. I said, wow, I worked with him too. Maybe I'm getting old.
That's what one of the guys told me previously, Peter Blage. He's like, I knew it was time to retire when the sons of guys I worked with started coming into my command. I'm like, yep, It's time to go. Mm-hmm. But like you said, the tradition is strong. We have a guy here. I think he's familiar with you, and you might be familiar with him too. John Paul DeJoria says, Bob's haircut looks spot on. You can tell he didn't go to Vidal Sassoon Salon.
I just got it cut yesterday after 2 weeks on the road. I needed it.
I got mine cut today. Same thing. My hair was looking scruffy. I needed to get it taken care of, and I did. Shout out to Orlando's Barbershop. We're talking with retired Battalion Chief Bob Ingram. It's volume 34, the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's lead. Bob spent the majority of his career, of course, in the HazMat team and was a charter member of the command when it was started up in 1984. So, life in the academy is interesting because, as I covered before, with the guys that came on when you did, A lot of the guys that are teaching you are guys that were on during the 60s, kind of like we were talking about a little bit off the air, on during the 70s, maybe had some military experience too on top of that. So they're very hardened guys, but they're also really good firemen. Who would you say were the people, or just even if it was just one person that stuck out in particular that really molded you during your time in the academy?
Hmm. There's just really one that just stuck out just because he was a character. He was a lieutenant, and I'd probably butcher his name right now if I tried to remember it, but everybody just referred to him as the Duke. He was just this big hulk of a lieutenant, and he just had this booming voice. And I can just remember him like in the smoke room, telling everybody to stand up and make us sing a song in the smoke room. And it was just a character. I also had him again as an instructor when I went back a couple of years later for chauffeur school.
Mm.
And we were out. I was doing my final road test on a tiller ladder with him. It was kind of funny. We went out of the academy grounds, and I was in the tiller. I was in the cab, and another fireman was in the back. And we went all the way down to the sanitation end, and we had to make a U-turn and turn around and come back. And to turn the vehicle like that, even with the tiller, it went off the road. So as I'm pulling back onto the road, I see a dust cloud behind the vehicle. And okay, so I look again about 5 or 10 seconds later, and there's still a cloud behind me in the mirror. I look behind me, and the engine was on fire in the back of the cab. So we had to pull over, and the Duke took control, and he was going to run and get some help from the academy and put the fire out. It was he was quite a guy. I remember those two instances about him. They just really, people like that, they really had a good presence of mind, and they really took control of situations, and they taught us a lot. It was good.
You were first due there, I imagine, at that particular fire.
Yes. But the apparatus back then were not the same as the ones we have in chauffeur school now. They were completely
Right.
stripped down. They were old apparatus. The department has come a long way in providing updated apparatus in the chauffeur school.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a fan of the old school. I love, as a just history buff, I love looking at the rigs that you guys had in the 90s, especially. But make a comparison on what you guys were driving in 1996 compared to what you guys are driving now. Like you said, it's night and day.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even more night and day. The first fire truck I ever drove was in the volunteers, and it was a 1964 Ward LaFrance engine with a 3-foot wide back step that we were riding the back step with like 4 firefighters on it,
Yeah.
manual transmission. Even nowadays, just the fact that they're all automatic basically is a change. Even when I got on in 82, there was still a lot of standard shift ladder trucks in the job.
Yeah. The rigs, I understand why the fleets change, but it's kind of like comfort food. When I see those old, longer rigs, even the ones I grew up seeing in the 2000s, and I see one still around every now and then, my heart kind of skips a beat and it flutters with warmth because I recall, being a boy and seeing those rigs and wanting to drive one of them one day. But, the evolution is necessary because the most important thing is keeping the members safe, because just as important as putting these fires out or any emergency, responding to them, is just that, getting there safely. With this new apparatus that the members have, they can do just that, or at least the chances have gone up significantly in being able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
great thing.
Yeah, the apparatus is much safer, but it's also more complicated, and it's got a lot more technology in it, and hopefully the technology holds up.
Yeah.
Too many times in vehicles, the technology breaks down and causes problems. So
Tesla. Yeah. So, sorry, I had to clear my throat there. With that being said, I guess that brings us into, of course, getting onto the job. Obviously, we'll get to HazMat in 84, but 1982 to 1984, where did you work originally?
Ladder 163 in Queens with engine 325, and great company, great people. It was a changing time for the fire department. We had the layoffs in the mid 70s, and firefighters just starting to come back. In 82, there were 4 members from my probie class that went to that house. And the class before that sent 4, the class before that sent 4. I think there were 12 probies in that firehouse in 1 year. And the one on one of the tours, the junior man carrying the can had 17 years in the company before that.
Wow.
The four chauffeurs, one Billy Bertalik, he had 40 years in the same company, and the other three chauffeurs all had 35 or 36. They came out of companies in the Bronx and Brooklyn. Both captains had over 35 years. So we had a lot of experienced firefighters, which was good because they had to really space out 12 recruits at one time so that we weren't all working at the same time.
What a sweet spot to be in, though. The junior guy of the bunch, not counting you, of course, has 17 years on. I mean, talk about a great place to learn.
It was. Everybody there had been in busy companies. Billy, I think, was the only one that was assigned to that company and stayed there his whole career. The rest of them came out of Brooklyn or the Bronx, where they had worked in busy companies, but moved closer to home in their later years. And 163 and 325, they were like a mid-range company, 3,000 calls a year, 2,500, somewhere in that range back then. But it was interesting work. We went down into Long Island City. We were over in Astoria, Roosevelt Island. So it was good. Learned a lot.
I imagine, and as I covered before with guys both in the PD side and FD side that have worked in Queens, the misconception, I mean, the joke has been thrown around a lot, Queens Marines. You guys do work in Queens. I mean, you guys really do back then and still now. There's a wide gamut of emergencies in Queens, and fires are not exempt from that. You guys had a lot of, as did the whole city, but you guys, especially in Queens, had a lot of duty back then in that regard.
Oh, yeah. Some of them were tough apartment fires, probably more on the south side of Brooklyn and Queens, where you had a lot more old wood frame homes, but the apartment houses had their share too.
So do you recall your first fire specifically?
It was an apartment fire. I can remember working, it was Lieutenant Jablonowski and Tom Harrington, another fireman that came in that year with me on the inside team. And I can remember just being the smoke banked down from ceiling to floor. It wasn't a lot of heat. It wasn't a big fire, but it had been smoldering for a long time. And, just following Tom Harrington around on one side and Lieutenant on the other until we found the fire and knocking it down with the can. But it's always good to get that first one out from under your belt and just to feel a little bit more comfortable that you can do that. So it was good.
I have to go back for a second because naturally, and I remember originally bringing up this point with Hank Millay and then again getting into it with Tim Brown, in the fact that, of course, you had the prior experience. In Tim's case, he was a firefighter here in Connecticut in Newington. Hank's case, he was also a volunteer. And the guys, obviously, and it makes sense. Okay, great. You have the experience there. That's how they do it over there, but it's a lot different here. It's an entirely new concept, an entirely new ballgame. I imagine, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but I imagine you tried to keep your volley experience hidden.
No, it came out pretty quickly.
All right.
In Proby school, as well as in my first company. But I didn't bring it up that often, but I tried to use what I learned out in the volunteers in the city. So from that point, it was good.
Because it's kind of almost like a retraining process. Even the terminology is different in certain areas.
In some of the departments, yes. Some of the departments on the island, they really didn't want any influence from the FDNY, but we had a couple of FDNY members there that were old timers in the volunteers, and they had taken to training out in our department. So we had the benefit of some of the terminology and some of the tactics that were used in the city already. So we had a good benefit from that point.
I would say. Were there any grabs that you made during that time? Any specific rescues?
No, I probably didn't make any grabs until I was a captain. Because primarily I was only in the ladder company for 2 years, a little under 3 years, maybe 2 years and 8 months before I transferred into the HazMat company. In the HazMat company, we're not being first due, so we're not making grabs. So I spent 6 years as a firefighter in HazMat.
Okay.
Probably the first one was as a captain covering over in the 13th Division. I was covering a vacation in Ladder 143, and we had a Queen Anne fire on the second floor. We were able to get up there with the line at the same time. One of the firefighters on the inside team pulled a woman out of a bedroom on the left side. I pulled a man out of a bathtub in the bathroom. And the outside team was remarkable. They put two portables together outside a window, and both of them lowered down a 300-pound man horizontal on the ladders using their arms to support him horizontally. But unfortunately, all three of the victims succumbed to the smoke injuries later on. But that was probably the first time that I had an opportunity like that to help somebody.
That's always that has to be hard, because that's the thing that always bothers me, just as a civilian, in observing these fatal fires. Sometimes, yes, they are burned. Either way, it's sad that they die. But sometimes it's not even the flames that gets them; it's the smoke that kills them.
Right. Yeah, the fellow in the bathtub apparently tried to fill the tub up with water and save himself, thinking that he would be okay in there. But the smoke, you got to still keep your face above the water and breathe.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, of course, very tragic indeed. So that brings us into 1984 and getting to HazMat. And this is during a time when the perception of hazardous materials is a little bit different than it is now. I mean, obviously, people understand its function. And I don't think it's that people were blissfully ignorant towards it back then, as much as it is like with anything that's new, people just didn't understand it. And how could they, right? So tell
Yeah,
me
I think
about
some of it was exactly as you're saying, a misunderstanding. But some of it, the old, my friend Danny from Ladder 120, what are you going there for? That's mop and glow. You're going to be cleaning up stuff off the floors. Come to Brooklyn and fight fires. And that was a big thing. I mean, even one early call, we had a leaking 55-gallon drum of acid in a yard in Brooklyn, and if you've ever seen hazmat teams get involved in dressing out in a level A ensemble, it takes a good 15 to 20 minutes. And we had a chief there saying, if you lima beans don't get in that suit faster, I'm sending a truck company in. So yeah, we had to put up with a little bit of verbal, jabs in the beginning there. But I think over the years, they have to have come to an acceptance of the fact that hazardous materials are all around us. In fact, when I teach classes, I could throw out a challenge to the students and say, just name any incident you want, and I'll tell you there's a hazardous material involved in it. Whether it's bloodborne in a car accident, whether it's the materials that are used in building construction now that have chemicals in them to repel bugs and insects in the wood, whether it's the plastics in a vehicle, whether it's the plastics in a home, the commercial bleaches and ammonias under the kitchen sink, almost everything, the siding on the houses, a vinyl, asbestos shingles. There's hazardous materials everywhere. And most of the time they're there in a good use, in a good way, and we are comfortable with them and overlook them. But when they start to come apart in a fire or any type of other release, it's when it hurts us. And that's when people take a step back, but usually that step back is already after they've been involved or exposed.
Yeah. No, and it makes sense, because if you think about it, you hit the nail on the head, and I will talk about that a little bit later on. Construction in the city is always going on. They're always building something. So there is that hazard. And I remember having a conversation with Lieutenant Ray McCormick during the summertime, where we mentioned the material sometimes. Let's say an office space catches fire, papers there. Or in his case, in that iconic 1991 roof rope rescue with Kevin Shea of Rescue One, that was a record store on the top floor that caught on fire. The vinyl, that contributes to it too. So these materials, I think what makes it even more complex, and what makes the hazmat unit, the FDNY, interesting, it's all, and I know it sounds cliche, but New York, everybody's on top of each other. It's a compact space, which not only compounds the danger of where the fire is, but what it can do if it can get to the next building or the next department over that also has hazardous materials in it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of storage in old areas. You're talking about the vinyl records. There was one we went to, somebody was storing old films in an attic in their house, and the nitrocellulose, when it's dried out and old, is extremely explosive in terms of its rapid flammability. And there was, second alarm where the initial units were going up to fight the fire, and it rapidly ignited, throwing them all out the front door. And just a lot of situations like that. A lot of crazy things that we've come across in the city, cylinder of phosgene under a staircase in an apartment house, a chop shop on the 4th floor of a 6-story project with enough parts for 2 cars and a motorcycle, and the fuels. It's crazy what you find in the city. And you're right, the population density makes it a real hazard. We don't have the big refineries like Houston might have to deal with in their ports, or the pipelines that come out of there with the refined products. We don't allow them with fire prevention because of the population density, but we get all of these oddball things.
Right.
Just kind of crazy. I had a call one day from the health physicist from the Department of Health. And he said, Bob, I'm going into Brooklyn tomorrow to check out what a guy's doing. I think you should come with me. And I said, what makes it interesting to me, Andy? And he said, well, the guy developed a cold fusion device in a 6-story building, and he's producing neutrons. And I'm like, really? I think that sounds interesting. I think I'll go. And the guy was a computer programmer, pretty smart individual, and he wanted to take the cold fusion process one more rung up the ladder. It's been around for a long time, but nobody has ever made it profitable and economical to make it a commercially viable product. So this guy spent like $35,000 of his own money to develop this neutron device. And sure enough, he was producing neutrons in the space. The funny part about it, really not so funny at all, was the local fire company had gone there on a building inspection a couple of weeks prior, and during the course of their inspection of the building had come across this unit and got to talking with the fellow, and he was so intrigued that they were there. He took pictures of them with him and then posted them on his website to say that the fire department approved of this neutron device. I had to talk to him about taking the pictures of the company members off the device and off the website and saying, we don't approve this.
It's kind of like the adage that you see now on social media: retweets are not endorsements, or reposts are not endorsements. It's exactly. They were intrigued, but that didn't mean they were on board per se.
Exactly. And certainly the fire department wasn't.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so a few more shout outs here to our friends in the live chat tuning in tonight. I acknowledged Darren Phillips earlier. He's here, as is Jay Driscoll. It's good to see you. Jake Rixner now is here. And Garrett Lindgren's here, of course, from Rescue 3. He's watching. He says, good evening, all. So it's good to see you, Garrett. Always a big supporter of this show. There's always the growing pains of a new unit, and you kind of touched on it now. 84, 85, 86, you're trying to get off the ground and trying to make people understand it in the city, not just residents, but obviously the higher-ups in the fire department, those at City Hall as well. This is why we're here. This is why you need us. It's tough, but it's a beautiful thing when you look back in hindsight and you see, well, just that, the infancy stages and what you had to do and the fact that you were doing more with less. So when you look back on those first 2 years, what were the biggest challenges, but what were the biggest rewards?
Well, there were a lot of challenges internally within the house. We were put into a house with it was designed as a double house, but only had a single engine. So we were taking over a lot of their space. So we really had to work with them to get them to accept us and understand what we were trying to deal with. And we had to understand what they were now accepting, all of these 39 other people coming into the house and taking over most of their space. You had to work out the small issues in the firehouse, like commissary and cooking and cleaning issues with all of that. But we were also doing a lot of training, so we weren't always there. The engine was really great. They picked up a lot of slack for us. We were out all the time. In fact, one of the things we tried to do in the beginning was everybody was going to put $1 in a pool every time you worked. And the first crew that went to all 5 boroughs in one 24-hour shift would get the pool. Nobody ever won, but We were dealing a lot with new equipment. We, of course, had some basic equipment from the second piece that came to HazMat from Rescue 4. Rescue 4, of course, was doing the first HazMat response from about 80 to 84, 81 to 84, after the incident with the LPG tanker on the George Washington Bridge, which started the whole process up. But we needed a lot more equipment. So what we really did, and I'll give credit to Captain Gallagher, the first captain, and the three officers we had. We had Joe Giordano, whose son is a staff chief now. We had John Calderon, who retired out of the battalion, probably one of the longest serving battalion chiefs that I'm aware of in the job, and Joe Buell, both of them coming out of Rescue 4. But they took each of the members of the company and assigned us something. Phil McGardle was in charge of looking for schools to attend. Somebody was looking at level A ensembles. I was looking at level B ensembles. John Norman was there. He had a background in knowledge in plumbing, so he was looking at all of the equipment that we needed on the apparatus. We had Chris Waters there from Rescue 3, Noel. He was a chemistry teacher, and later on became the chair of the chemistry training program down at the National Fire Academy. He helped with a lot of the training and setup for us. And we had a tremendous amount of people in that first group. There were 60 volunteers to sign up to try to get into the company, and they picked 35. One of the guys, Billy Bulkeman, was a pesticide applicator out on the island. So we had a wide variety of talented people there. Vinnie Doherty had a degree in chemistry. Kevin Cully had a degree in chemistry. So we were able to portion out the workload to really try and get up to speed with some of the few other HazMat companies around the country. Jacksonville, Florida was one of the first ones, if not the first one. Houston was up there too. We had a lot of catching up to do, and the team pulled together quite well, but it was challenging. We also had issues at the top, getting the chiefs to understand this is not a fast process. And I still say it to this day. I don't know of any HazMat team that's ever saved somebody. Life safety is done by first due companies. We're going in to try and mitigate the material from affecting other people, to try and contain it, neutralize it, put it someplace else. And it's a slow process. And because there's no life safety usually involved except our own, it should be a slow process. Taking the time to think about what the issues are, to sometimes taking samples and moving them around and testing them in the street before you can take an action. I can remember one of those we had in Brooklyn. A man had a contract company. He was a salvager that would purchase the contents of buildings that had where the business had gone out of business. And he had a new contract that he needed to have some empty drums to go and collect the stuff out of the new building. And he had a drum in the back of it was a 5-bay garage that he owned behind a row of homes in Brooklyn. And we accessed it through an 8-foot wide alley. He had a drum of bags of sodium chips, metallic sodium chips. And he took the bags out and was throwing them on the ground so he could use the drum. One of the bags broke open and ignited with the moisture on the ground, the dew. It's very reactive with water, moisture. And he tried putting it out with a garden hose. It got a little bigger. So he stopped putting water on it, started spitting back at him. It's like even probably more reactive than magnesium when we deal with magnesium fires on vehicles. And first 2 units came and they saw fire. So they took out a hand line and put water on it, and it got worse. And then they decided to smother it with some sand. So we got there and we took some samples, and Kevin Cully was one of the ones, chemistry degree, played with it in the street, and we determined it was metallic sodium. So we had to overpack it in a drum. The 2 of us went in and we put in some absorbent oil dry, then a bag, another layer of oil dry, a bag, another layer. We got to the last 2 bags and we ran out of oil dry. So we figured we would use the sand from the same pile that the first two units had used to smother the fire. Except now we were digging deeper into the pile of sand, and we've got some wet sand and put it on the second to last bag. Before we could lift up the last bag to put it in, the thing pretty much exploded out of the can. It reacted that violently with the wet sand. And we had a lot of learning lessons like that in the early days, a lot of challenges.
I'll say. This is volume 34 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's lead. Our guest is retired FDNY Battalion Chief Bob Ingram of the HazMat division. Getting into the 90s now, I think it was a new era with new challenges in that not only did you have to worry about the new threat of terrorism, but the city was undergoing, not so much in the earlier portion of the decade, but once you got to 1994, 95, through the end of the decade, a real renaissance. It was coming back to life. Things were really starting to turn around. And with that, new buildings, new businesses, which is great, but at the same time, new challenges now because there's more things to keep track of. There's more potential disasters that can happen. And you guys were on overdrive as it was. How did that mid-90s renaissance in any way alter the way that HazMat for the FDNY operated?
Well, probably two biggest ones I can think of, and you hit one of them on the head, was the visual or observation of terrorist challenge. But even prior to that, the federal government, like state governments and local governments, they have ups and downs. New teams, new administrations come in, and they all have their priorities. HazMat was a funded priority in the 80s. In the early 90s, the funding priority became technical rescue. You had your high angle, your trench, your collapse. That started to get funding because in the mid 80s, OSHA came out with the HazMat law, 1910-120 CFR. In the late 90s, or late 80s, early 90s, it started to come out with the confined space legislation. So funding started to go to that. It's like the hot topic gets the money. So HazMat funding slowed down a little bit in the early 90s, and we did not do much but maintain what we had. Even though we were starting to get a lot more calls, we were getting calls at the same time in different boroughs and having to put some on hold based on what the issues were. And that need to increase our capabilities is what drove the department to train other units going further. In 96, they agreed to train Squad 1's 41 and Rescue 5 to handle hazardous materials. And it was also at that time we started to work with the Department of Defense, Jack Fanning and Dario Gonzalez, the doctor on the EMS side that came over when we moved the EMS from health and hospitals to the fire, and Ray Downey were the three USAR team leaders. And they had responded to Oklahoma City. We watched the unfolding of the World Trade Center in 93. The Oklahoma was 95, and the Sarin Tokyo release in 95 also. So it really started to drive the need to improve our capabilities and our resources. So we started to get involved actually down in the Pentagon. Jack got us down there. Today, that each of the states has one or two civil support teams, 22-person National Guard units. The original concept was called RAID, the Rapid Assessment and Identification units out of the Department of Defense. And Jack Fanning had a big role in helping with that. And as his XO at the time and developing the technician school, I was fortunate enough to see a lot of that and work with them. They needed help in understanding the urban environment, and we needed help in understanding what they knew about chemical warfare agents. We were able to bring DOD instructors up into New York City, not only with the fire department, but through Jerry Hauer over at OEM. The police department was involved, and also some of the folks over at DEP and DOH, where we started to get training on the chemical agents, their capabilities, their chemical and physical properties, their signs and symptoms, and we started delivering some of those classes. We probably delivered it to about 2/3 of the fire department before 9/11. It was ongoing for several years. But also we did training. We had chemical exercise in 1997 called the ICE drill, the interagency chemical exercise with 100 victims of a sarin release in Manhattan. And we learned a lot from that in terms of we need a lot of manpower or staffing to move a lot of non-ambulatory victims. It takes 2 to 4 people on a Stokes or stretcher to carry somebody. And from that, Jack started to look at, along with Phil McGardle and myself, starting to develop the tiered response that we have to this day, where we started in 96, we trained 10 ladder companies between 96 and 97 in the chemical protective clothing to go in and help rescue and extricate non-ambulatory victims. And we trained 10 ambulance units, 5 BLS and 5 ALS, in chemical ensembles. They were assigned breathing apparatus and be able to go into a hot zone and triage patients that are affected by chemical warfare agents. We started to get into the biological a little bit more in 98. The city ran the BAD drill, the biological agent drill, with an airborne release of anthrax spores over the city from a plane. And how we would react to that. And that was mostly a tabletop, but it really opened a lot of eyes of the officials in all of the key 5 agencies, as well as the mayor's office. 99, we were supposed to do a radiological drill on a boat in the harbor, but that was an issue that it came up with some interagency discussions that we would not be able to handle that one properly out on a boat. But it was also the same time the PD and the fire were going through their first, later on called SIMS, but our first response matrix discussions or negotiations. We were having a lot of issues in the streets at that time with some of the police units and fire units. And Frank Carruthers, Jack Fanning, Ray Downey, and myself were representing the fire side, and we had Bill Morange, the commander of police SOD, and his executive officer, and a couple of others, trying to hash out the management control issues of different types of events. So we were dealing with that as well. In 98, the city and fire department got some additional funding. At that time, Commissioner Von Essen increased our capabilities by coming up with the squad concept. It was actually something that was put forward by Fanning and Downey to meet the needs for additional resources in both the rescue components as well as the hazardous materials / WMD. So they approved the funding for that. The engines were changed over to squads, and we trained the 7 more squads to that capability. And then Von Essen found additional funding and said, okay, you're going to train the other 4 rescues too. So we trained them in technician. We really had a good capability in that time. By the time 2001 came along with 9/11. But as we talked earlier before the show started, we only had about 600 to 700 members in SOC at that time between the rescue operations and the HazMat operations. After 9/11, HazMat Command trains about 3,000 members above operations now and keeps them trained to that level on an annual basis. So our capabilities improved drastically. But everything changed. The apparatus had to change to carry the equipment on all these units. The training had to change. Funding had to change. And unfortunately, after 9/11, we got a lot of federal funds to increase the HazMat and WMD capability. It did create some challenges too, because the funding draws attention of other agencies, and other agencies wanted some of that funding. So it was kind of split. Kind of an interesting time.
Yeah, I'll say. I'll say. And just to go back for a moment, as this is happening, and I'll get back to 9/11 in a moment because there's an interesting subplot in that for HazMat. But prior to that, by 2000, you were a chief, and unless you went to other companies during that time, which I don't think you did, if I'm not mistaken, most people, when they make lieutenant, when they make captain, when they make chief, they have to go elsewhere for a while, especially once you hit lieutenant, learn how to be a lieutenant, and then you can come back to your old company if you want
Right.
to. I don't think you had to, and that had to have been a real big blessing to stay in the same
No,
place.
I actually did.
You did? Okay,
I
where'd you go?
did, and for me personally, it was a challenge, and probably the main reason why I did not go beyond battalion to deputy chief,
Mm.
because I got promoted to lieutenant and I was assigned out to the 3-5 battalion and worked out there for a little over a year. Although assigned to the 3-5, I spent most of the time in the 3-1 and the 3-2, areas that were difficult to get to because of their location. So they were always short officers. Had my first fires as a lieutenant in that area down in Red Hook. My first couple of fires as a lieutenant in that area. Actually had a fire in 102 truck as a new lieutenant. And one of the probies that I had on my ensign team is now the chief of training, Chuck Downey, as a captain. And after that time, I was asked by Tom Fitzpatrick, who was Von Essen's right-hand man, to come back and start up the first HazMat training program for the FDNY, which we started it in 92. I was writing it. It was kind of interesting. We had a room in Building 9 at the Rock. I was writing the HazMat training program on one side of the room, and John from Rescue 3 and Mike Weinlein were writing the Rescue Ops training program on the other side of the room. I was later had Pete Stubbe come and help me, who retired as a HazMat battalion chief, and George Mayer, who retired as a battalion chief out of Battalion 9. We wrote that first program, but it was one that was intended to be a lesson plan provided to the officers and the companies to deliver themselves. None of us liked the idea. None of us thought that having an untrained HazMat officer deliver the training would be a good idea, but that was the funding they had at the time. But after about 5 or 6 months, we were able to put a report together and show them that it wasn't working. The company officers weren't prepared well enough in the background of HazMat to deliver the lesson plans. And we were able to bring in 15 or 20 officers, and we put together a training program and opened up 4 training sites. So I managed that for about a year and a half, and then I got promoted to captain. So I had to study for fire captain while I was a HazMat lieutenant writing HazMat work, which is difficult because there's very few HazMat questions. And so I covered as a captain from 94 to 97, 2 years bouncing, 1 year UFO in Engine 303 in Jamaica, which was great. It got me back into the fireside very quickly. And I ended up as a captain at 273 in Flushing for 1 year. And then in 97, Jack Fanning asked me to come back to HazMat and start to develop the HazMat technician school at the academy, which I did. Had 2 great, my first 2 staff people, Tony Musafidi, a fireman out of HazMat, still a great friend of mine to this day. Worked with him for the last 20 years. And Lieutenant Dave Fenton from the EMS operations side of the fire department right after the merger. The 3 of us, we did everything we could, scrounged equipment, tools. We wrote training programs. And eventually the HazMat Tech School grew to where it's a full-time school. And we're training people. We have officers assigned there all the time. And we put a lot of people through that school. But I did that until I was promoted to XO for HazMat. I did that for a little while with Jack and as the chief. And then in 2000, I got promoted battalion chief. And I was given the position of executive officer for special operations. I replaced George Mayer, who replaced Mike Weinlein. That role was a Monday through Friday job. The chief in charge on the staff side was Frank Carruthers. Later became chief of department twice and then first deputy commissioner.
Right.
He worked 24-hour tours, as all the staff chiefs did at that time. So they needed somebody day to day to handle the requests from Ray Downey in Rescue, Jack Fanning in HazMat, and Bill Guido in the Marine Division. That was the role I did for a year until 9/11. On 9/11, actually in the morning of 9/11, I was in my office 2 doors down from Chief Gansey's, and I was on the phone with Gene Ryan, the chief of HazMat for Chicago Fire, and 2 firemen ran past the door to the office, which doesn't happen on the 7th floor of headquarters. And I said, Gene, something happened. I think somebody got hurt. I got to go. And I went to Chief Gansey's room. They were looking out the window at the smoke coming out of the first tower. And from there, we all got in our cars and responded over to the World Trade Center. We all got there before the second plane hit. We were there about 10 or 15 minutes setting up the command post before the second plane hit. So it's I bounced back and forth. And every time I went to take another test, like I took one deputy's test, and because I was so involved in rebuilding the HazMat, I think I studied for a good hour. I think I got like a 58 or a 60 on the exam. And I made a decision at that time. I was so involved with the HazMat that I wouldn't take any of the deputy chief's tests. So I stayed as a battalion chief for a little over 17 years.
There's a picture that you have. I'm trying to find it. It's on your Facebook where the South Tower had come down by that point.
That's correct.
And the North Tower was still standing, and you can barely see. It's very eerie. Who did you take that?
No, I was actually taken by a Daily News photographer who was on the scene early on in the incident. I didn't know about it until maybe several months after 9/11, and one of the officers working with me said, there's a World Trade Center photo gallery down in Lower Manhattan. There's a picture in there. I think that's you. You should go look at it. Mm-hmm. I went down there one day, a week or two later, and it was me. And the photographer gave me a copy of the picture. So,
wow, yeah, my goodness, yeah, it's definitely, like I said, an eerie photograph, and I'll try to find it. And I'll get to Jack Fanning and some of the other guys in HazMat who were lost that day in a second. But just to go back a year, 2000, by that point, you're a chief. You have 18 years on, which is pretty impressive to make chief in that amount of time. Was there part of you, I mean, even though you were very happy where you were and where you were working, and that's where you wound up staying, was there part of you that said, you know what? I could keep going. If I got this amount of stuff done in 18 years, imagine what the next 18 years can get me.
Yeah, but I had already made my mind up that the direction I was going was in HazMat versus going up on the fire side. Right. There, at one point, I was offered the captainship of the HazMat company, and I turned it down to stay as Jack's XO because I just felt that it was a position where I could make a better change for the department and would provide more opportunities for me to get information to help the department. And that worked out really well. There's only some times where firefighters, you got to have an A-type personality. It's like police officers. And a couple of times in my career, I felt a little bit of that A-type personality coming out of me where I felt I should have been doing something different. One of them, when I see, people that were firemen when I was a battalion chief going past me as now going to deputy and staffs, that tweaked me a little bit. Another one was when I was asked to go to the first master's program at the Naval Postgraduate School Center for Homeland Defense and Security. And I couldn't go because I had never finished my bachelor's degree. So they took my boss, Mike Weinlein, and my XO, Vinnie Doherty, in the pilot master's program. That tweaked me. And I went back to school, got my degree, and then went and got the master's as well as executive leadership programs out there. But other than that, I'm glad that I went the direction that I did.
Right.
I wish that some of the people who went on the fire side would take more of an aggressive role in overall leadership of the department in all of these specialty areas. But we seem to be sometimes focused solely on the fire. Um, that gets me a little sad in where I see the department in that area right now. But I'm very glad I went the way I did. The opportunities that I received in the HazMat, through the department and the national organizations and committees that the department allowed me to participate in. I went to Israel 3 times on work to study over there and work with the Israeli Defense Command and the police and bomb squads over there. I went to Brazil, work with their first response group in the military. I've been to England to work with them and the London Fire Brigade. I went with the Department of Energy to go to India to work with their atomic energy people on responding for dirty bombs. The opportunities to get that information from those other countries and bring it back and incorporate it into our policies and procedures and training. I think that was so much more beneficial to the department.
And as I covered with Chief Norman, I feel like you guys did yeoman's work both on that day and especially in 2002 and 2003, because that laid the groundwork for now to where everyone was wondering, okay, this happened, meaning the 11th. What else is next? What else can happen? And what should we be prepared for so that we can try to stop it before it happens on the law enforcement side? But if, God forbid, it does come to fruition once again, how can we make sure that we can mitigate the crisis, which is what, unfortunately, because you guys were so blindsided by what occurred on 9/11, you guys couldn't do through no fault of your own. So I feel like that effort or those efforts in those early years afterwards were so amazing because it finally, and it's sad that it took such a tragedy to make this point so clear, but I think it drove the point home, at least if you want to look at silver linings. Okay, rather be the federal side, the local side, everybody has somebody or multiple people with a certain area of expertise. Let's combine those talents to where you can produce something for the greater good and safety of society, both in the local level and, as you just mentioned, with going overseas multiple times to different places on the international level too.
Oh, yeah. Just a point you say after 9/11, I sometimes bring this up in some of the training classes. We had September 11th, of course. October, we had the anthrax.
Right.
November, we had the plane crash in the Rockaways.
Flight 587.
December, we had a titanium fire in Lower Manhattan that sent 43 firefighters and officers to the hospital. January, we had another titanium fire in another chiller unit on the World Trade Center site. So and then right from that get-go until for about the next 6 or 7 or 8 years, how many special events we covered in special operations with the fire department and first line units in certain areas. You had the Congress wanted to come up and hold a session in New York City. We had to deal with them and the Capitol Police and all of the protective services for the Congress people. You had the presidents coming in, and those were all special operations. We had the Yankee World Series that had to be protected. You had the Subway Series that had to be protected. You have all the parades that started to come back after that first year where they were shut down. The UN General Assembly. In 2004, we had the Republican National Convention. Just for as I said, 6 or 7 or 8 years, it was just one after another after another. At the same time, we were still continuing to rebuild and build our resources and capabilities. After 9/11, we increased the resources in the HazMat Command with an additional 19 chemical protective clothing ladder companies. We added the 25 SOC support decon engine and SOC support ladder companies. We added another 20, probably 20, 30, 29 more HazTac ambulance units, ALS and BLS. We added the HazTac Battalion. And when I took over the HazMat command on September 12th, I was the only chief. Now you have a full-time HazMat battalion. You have a HazMat division. You have the position that I held when I retired that Chief Timmy Rice has now, the WMD position, that are all full-time capabilities that are now a resource. We added our decon trailer capabilities for technical decon for not only responders but civilians. And we just improved the training and the resources tremendously. So we were able to, right now we're pretty well prepared for a lot. I'll never say we're always prepared, because these skills, just like the rescue skills or anything else, even speaking a language, if you don't practice it, they go away very quickly, because they're not ones we use every day. So all of these companies that get dual trained in dual missions, fire or medical, in addition to HazMat, we have to maintain their skills as a department. So it's an ongoing process. And it's one where when budgets get tight, it's always a question of where do we cut, what do we keep, what do we let go.
It's a difficult juxtaposition to find yourself in. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you handled it well. And I guess now before I ask about Chief Fanning, I do have a question from Mike Thomas in the chat. He says, "Hey, Chief, I want to ask, right after you got to the Trade Center, what was your first task?"
We formed a command post in the driveway to the underground parking garage of the World Financial Center. Chief Gansey was there, Chief Downey, myself, the safety chief Al, and we were lining up truck companies on one side of the ramp and engine companies on the other side of the ramp. And when the inside commands in the two lobbies would call for additional units, particularly in the North Tower at first, we would send up the next truck in line or the next engine in line and put the newly coming ones that were just arriving at the back of the line. It was also at that time I asked a ESU sergeant and his officer, who were in their ballistic gear and long guns, to go down into the parking garage and make sure that it was clear of anything, people that shouldn't be there, because I knew that we needed to have a place of refuge if something happened to the tower or to the command post. And that's where we went when the first tower, the South Tower, came down. The command post and the units all went into the parking garage. There was a lot of debris, a lot of smoke. We were in there probably 10 or 15 minutes, well, maybe 10 minutes before Ray Downey found a way out. And we reestablished the command post at the top of the ramp. And Ray Downey and Al Fuentes and probably John Paolillo at that time from the Rescue Battalion all went over to the South Tower to initiate rescue operations. I stayed with Chief Gansey at the top of the driveway ramp by the World Financial Center, right across the street from the North Tower. And we stayed in that location, directing units out of the North Tower to evacuate the building and to head back up north to around Church Street, where we would reestablish command. Chief Gansey and I were both standing at that location when the North Tower came down. I don't know why we did what we did. He ran south, I ran north. He was caught in the collapse. I got about a block and I rolled up under a tower ladder under the dual wheels, and I survived. But it was something I won't forget.
No, of course. I remember in 102 minutes that changed America at one point, and that must have been one of the emergency cops that you saw and spoke with. And there's a sea of firemen across the street waiting for their marching orders, and walking back and forth is an emergency service cop with the long gun. So I can't see his face. He has his back turned, so I don't know who it is, and I don't know what truck he worked in. I'd love to
Right.
find out, but I guess that kind of pieces that together for me because I remember distinctly that. And right by the command post, Eddie Metcalf from 252 is giving instructions to guys as well. And you guys were, as I don't have to tell you, because I've seen the photo. I didn't see you in it, but Chief Gansey's at the command post. You can see Commissioner Fian as well. You guys were right there. And it's Lou says it all the time. I'm getting salty. The guys have told me on this show from both the PD and FD side who were there. Guy walks right, guy walks left. He makes it. The guy banks to the other direction. He didn't. It's just I don't think it mattered if you were a chief with Ray Downey's experience or if you were one of the 6 probies from the class that just graduated that spring. That was their first and last fire, sadly. If you were in certain spots that morning and it was the wrong spot, well, then that was just the wrong spot.
Absolutely. No rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
No
Just
rhyme or reason.
senseless.
And I don't know the ESU sergeant or officer either. But I know that I did that because Chief Gansey and his driver, Steve, and we were talking to each other on the way over there, even though we were in different vehicles. I was already suggesting to Chief Gansey to call LaGuardia Tower to get information on the plane. We knew this wasn't an accident. It was too clear of a day for a pilot to fly a plane into that building.
Right.
Accidentally. So I'm pretty sure that in the back of my mind is why I wanted that garage cleared. I wanted to make sure that we could use it as a safe area of refuge.
No, it was smart that you did that. I remember Kenny Winkler. He was a cop in Truck 1. He worked with John Norman's brother, Dave. He was at the command post on the ESU side. And from Truck 2, guys were thinking about ground attacks, too, because nobody knew. I remember Peter Jennings saying this in an interview he did a few years before he passed away, where he said, now it's clear, plane hits building, building falls down, building falls down. You didn't know that in the moment. So Kenny's at the command post, and Mike Curtin, sergeant in Truck 2, and his driver, John Delara, pull up. Neither of those guys made it that day, unfortunately. And they were taking tactical gear off the truck, and Kenny had to tell them, we're not going tactical here. You're going in. We're doing rescue here. So, you just didn't know. But that was an operation that still to this day, and last note on it, paves the way for future rescue operations because, yes, there were a lot of good people lost that day. But my goodness, there are 25,000 people who got to see another day thanks to what you guys did.
Yeah.
It's a noble thing.
Yeah. I sent the HazMat team in there. I had to answer for that. But
Sorry.
I was asked why I did that. And I said, because we've been training for 4 years now for a terrorist attack. This is a terrorist attack. We needed to know if there was something else on that plane.
Yeah. No, it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's understandable that, and I guess now I can finally ask you about Chief Fanning. Here was a guy that, again, all 8 of those guys, not that I'm putting Chief Fanning above them, each of them were important. Each of them, meant something to not only that unit, but the department as a whole. But here was a guy that you worked with and undoubtedly loved. When you look, I always like to focus on the good memories with these guys, not just how they died. So when you look back on Chief Fanning, what are your fondest memories of the man?
Oh, plenty of them. I mean, we first worked together. He was the second captain of the HazMat company after Gallagher, and night and day between the two. They both did a lot of good for the company, but just night and day in how each of them treated people. And Jack was just a gentleman, absolutely a gentleman. He shared information. He trained people. If we at that time we would go to fires, and he'd take us up there because we had a few guys like myself that didn't have a lot of fire experience, and he'd be working with us and just talking to us and teaching us all the time. And he gave us every opportunity. He gave us the mission. He gave us the resources, and he told us to go run with things. I can remember talking to Jimmy Ellison one day. He was Ray Downey's XO, and I was Jack's. And Ray had gone on a trip with USAR for a program, And I asked Jimmy, what does Ray have you doing while he's gone? He said, he doesn't have me doing anything. And Jack was gone with him. And I said, well, Jack gave me a whole list of things to do. That was just that way. Jack really trained his people. He trusted people, and he gave them work to do. And I just learned so much from him in terms of leadership and how to listen to people, to give them the resources to help them to be better themselves.
That's the best kind of leader, right? Somebody that
Oh,
really puts their faith in their
absolutely.
men and women. And not only
Absolutely.
that, knows it plays to their strengths. I love a leader like that. Yeah, you want to brush somebody up on their weaknesses and help them, make it into a
Mhm.
strength. But I love when leaders immediately go for the strengths and put more of an emphasis on that, because I can speak from experience. Obviously, as a student, I've seen both extremes in teachers that really do see you for who you are, and
Mhm.
teachers who prefer to see you for who you're not, which makes you feel like you're 2 centimeters tall. When you get a guy
Right.
like that, you'll run through a brick wall for the guy.
Oh, absolutely. And he reinforced a lesson that I had learned earlier before I get into the fire department. As I told you earlier, I was managing 6 stores at one point
Right.
for a company. But prior to that position, I was passed over for promotion to a training supervisor from a store manager. And when I asked why I wasn't promoted, they told me, you're running the busiest store on the East Coast. But if we take you out, you didn't train anybody to replace you. So I always tried to make sure that if I wanted to move on, there was somebody that the powers to be would feel confident in as a replacement for what I was doing.
It's a good
And
way to be.
yeah, and Jack just reinforced that. He worked with the people under him and mentored them to do his job.
Love it. Moving ahead, to those last years, you get to the 2010s, and again, another decade with new challenges. It's continuing to evolve, but the fire service, by extension, is continuing to evolve with the times. And it's, as you said earlier, it's where it needs to be now. And it's amazing to see how far it's all come. And you get to 2017, and I'm curious with guys like you, because, yeah, you always want to keep going. Generally, guys tell me they wish they could stay forever, and there's not many jobs you can say that about. But when you get to 35, 40 years, in your case, just shy of 36, it's kind of like, okay, you know what? I imagine, you can correct me if this is not the right take. You must have felt like, wow, I pretty much accomplished everything I wanted to. And even though you would have liked to stay a little longer, hey, it's that you left on a high note. I would say it's a great career. There's not many regrets, I imagine.
No, maybe a couple of regrets and some reports that I could have written a little better in terms of when I left. I would have stayed until I was 65,
Mm,
but I had a knee replacement in
mm,
January 17, and they wouldn't let me back full duty. So that made a difference. It made a
mhm.
difference. In a way, it was probably good. I used up my comp time that I had, a ton of it, and vacation time, and I did some things on the outside that helped me transition from full duty fire service work to being on the outside. But it was a change. I would have stayed a little bit longer. I enjoyed what I did. I worked with great people, and again, the department gave me a tremendous amount of opportunities. Some of them challenging, some of them painfully difficult. But in addition to the traveling I did, I chaired an interagency board for 4 years that Jack stood it up with me and uh, other chiefs from around the country, A.D. Vickery in Seattle, Gene Ryan in Chicago. We were helping the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice with the FBI in urban environments, hazardous materials, OSHA laws, things that they didn't have to deal with overseas. And we got to do so much with that. Getting NIOSH to test breathing apparatus against chemical warfare agents, getting the Department of Defense to share information on chemical testing that they did on military mop gear that helped create the new generation of chemical protective ensembles that we see that are now past the level A encapsulating ones. Worked with the ANSI, American National Standards Institute, to develop radiation standards for the radiation equipment that we use. We worked with the NFPA. I've been on the NFPA HazMat committee since 1999. Jack put me on there. I'm still active with it. Not as a primary anymore from the FDNY, but as an alternate to another representative so that I can still participate in that. We worked with standards for the police department and the Fraternal Order of Police and the International Association of Chiefs of Police to develop HazMat ensembles and training for police officers. One of the concepts of the tiered response was incorporated into the NFPA 472 process, the tiered response, where we now see, in addition to the 5 OSHA levels of training, awareness, operations, technician, specialist, and incident commander, you have all of the mission-specific ones. That came out of work with the interagency board while I was chairing it, with the NFPA and ASTM. And now you have law enforcement officers that go into drug labs that need training in chemical ensembles and metering. You have crime scene technicians that need training in chemical ensembles and how to preserve contaminated evidence that may be, weaponized chemical materials or biological materials. The opportunities that are out there for people who are interested and want to take them on, just great.
I'll say the opportunities are endless. As you said, they're limitless. And it's a wide gamut on either side, the fire department side and the police department side, because now, unlike, when I mentioned earlier in 1984, everybody understands what it is. And naturally, everybody wants to be a part of it. But you can say, hey, I was there before it was cool.
Well, I still have my concerns that everybody knows it's there, but not enough people still take it to heart. We are still hurting people who don't wear their protective gear, even though they know the hazards.
Right.
And that's one reason why I still continue to deliver training to firefighters around the country, both from my consulting business as well as from a contract instructor for the IAFF. They know it's there. It's things that are around them every day, and they just don't follow through enough. And I'm just so sad that we still hurt people because they're not doing the right thing.
Yeah. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. So better to get out ahead of it, like
Absolutely.
we were saying earlier, before something happens. That's the main thing. I'm going to get to the rapid fire now. Before I do, speaking of emergency service, Patty Pogan says, hi, Mike, also a volunteer fireman. Please tell Bobby I said hello. He's a great guy.
Oh, yeah. Patty's a good guy.
Yeah, very good guy.
Worked with him a lot.
Yeah, he's been on this show for my ESU miniseries, and that was an all-time Mike the New Haven classic. If you want to go back and check that out for all you in the audience who have not. It's now time for the rapid fire. It's 5 hit-run questions from me and 5 hit-run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, first, funniest call you ever responded to?
I had to think about this one for a little while, and I think it was in a research lab in a hospital or university setting. Early on in our HazMat career, there was a fire in one of the research labs. First 2 units got in there, and with the hospital staff, the fire was extinguished readily and quite early on. It didn't get extend too far. But they wanted the HazMat team to come in. So we get there, and I was on the entry team with one other member. They wanted us to go into the lab in our ensembles to see if anything got out of the burnt incubator. And I'm like, what are we going into here? Am I waiting for some creature to jump on my back that got out of this incubator? It was like, sometimes people don't understand exactly what we do.
I'll say. Second most uplifting call you ever responded to?
Well, it had to be the World Trade Center. As devastating and terrible as that was, it was uplifting to see not only how the agencies came together, the city came together, the country came together in support. And that was amazing. The outpouring of people that came to help us while we were there the first couple of days was incredible. Of course, we had to change some of the things. There were people coming around with platters of food and drinks and everything for us. And after a couple of days, we had to stop and think, hey, wait a second, this is a terrorist attack. Are they giving us good food or bad? And we had to stop and really start to control a lot of those things. But it was just really great to see the way the country came together. And it's sad to see that a lot of people have forgotten already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Third, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Train your folks to work without you. Make sure that you have somebody that can do your job. Take every learning opportunity you can to make yourself better. I always say you should learn something new every day. If you don't, you might as well die.
Yeah, that's one way to put it, but it's true. He ain't lying, to borrow a line from an old movie. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
I don't go in there often, but a couple that I've gone to a few times is Becco's on West 46th in Manhattan. Excellent food. And I like P.O.P.O. with Peruvian food.
Can't go wrong with that. Before I get to the fifth and final question, Paulie Rogers is here. He says hello. Good interview. He says,
another good guy, Paul.
Hey, Paul. Tuning in at the buzzer. I'm glad you're here, buddy. Fifth and finally, what advice, besides what you just mentioned, of course, to train your people to work without you, if you can grab somebody fresh out of the academy, obviously with your experiences on the job, what advice would you give them?
Well, the one that I try to grab every recruit with right now is, because they're very young people, and I'm starting to see more of them that are coming in now that weren't born on 9/11.
Yeah.
That this is a whole new world than the fire department that I started with in 1974 and the volunteers in 82 with the city. This is one where we face threats every day from outside sources, many of them intentional. You got to get off your phones. You got to get into some more research of a in-depth nature. Okay, so they had a shooting in that bar in Colorado Springs 2 nights ago, or last night, with the 5 dead and 18 wounded. Find out about the individual. What was their intent? What was their motive? You have to look at these events now that are occurring not only around the city, but around the country, around the world, to see what types of materials are being used against first responders. What are the signs and symptoms? How can you protect yourselves against them? What do you need to look for? Be aware of your surroundings all the time, because just the accidents we deal with, the emergencies we deal with, but now the intentional acts, we have to be careful. If you want to survive your career happily and live a nice retirement, you got to be more aware. We just can't look at headlines. We got to look behind that and find out what's going on that's going to impact us in the fire service. That's one of the things about the watch line that it tries to put out every week. A couple of international items, a couple of national, and a couple of local. What was the incident and what's the impact on the fire service, our policies and procedures? Got to be aware.
Plain and simple. Thank you very much. Stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. I did link your consulting firm in the description of this video for those of you that want to check it out.
Thank you.
No problem. Anytime. So before we go, and like I said, stick around, and I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you would like to give?
Just anybody in the fire department listening. It's been a great opportunity, great time for me. I don't look back one day, but move forward. We can't get ourselves stuck in traditions. You got to look at the new hazards and emergencies we're dealing with now and face them.
I'll say, once again, well said. Thanks for doing this. I'll talk to you off the air. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, we go back to the EMEN tomorrow, volume 28. Not many people can say that the emergency service unit was their last stop in a police career in New York City. He can, and he finished up as a captain in the unit the last 6 years from 2016 up until earlier this year. He actually retired in June, and that'll be Stephen Espinoza, who'll be volume 28 of the EMEN inside the NYPD's emergency service unit. We don't quite have a guest yet for Friday. We're trying to figure it out. If we don't, I'll see you next week, but hopefully we can find one. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. I always appreciate it. You know how much I value you guys, whether you tuned in on LinkedIn or YouTube. It's always appreciated regardless. And with that being said, this has been volume 34, the best of the bravest. For those of you that tune in to Getting Salty, they're on in 5 minutes. I'll be there shortly. I'll see you in the live chat for that show. And in the meantime, this is, like I said, it's been volume 34, the best of the bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. And on behalf of retired FDNY Battalion HazMat Chief Bob Ingram, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of the night.
Thank you.